The Ramchal has been speaking for weeks on this, or from the very beginning, the concept of existence and the value of existence. The man was endowed with choice, so his actions should be attributed to himself, positive and negative. And the extent of the negative that we could go in that direction is only to give value to the positive. The wider the parameters, the greater is the value of the choice if you go in the right direction. I could have gone off the cliff. I could have, God forbid, become a heretic and denied God's existence. Not only did I not deny his existence, but I serve him with awe and with love at the most advanced level. That's how wide the difference is. So because I could have, through my choice, could have done the ultimate negative, and I chose to go in the ultimate positive, therefore the positive is greater value. Now, there's an expression, he can't fight his way out of a paper bag. You know, if you're in that bag, you don't have much room to move. But if you have the whole world available to you, and you could go in any direction you choose, and you choose to go in the right direction, that choice is a greater value choice. Okay, that's the concept. But that is very much on a personal level, but not only a personal level, we affect ourselves positively. We affect the Jewish people positively because we're all interconnected, and we perfect the world positively. Why? Because the world was only created to be the location for the challenges. So if one uses the amenities of life, which God provides, for its right purpose, God wills it should be more intense and more extensive and more available. Because we're actually utilizing the world what it's meant to be utilized for. That's the concept. That's what we've been discussing until now. He introduced just a few days ago the concept he refers to hashkocha klolis, with times where there's no rhyme or reason in terms of what we actually witness. The righteous are suffering. We're not speaking in a time with good times. You find the good are suffering and the good are thriving and the bad are suffering. We're talking about in general. The Jews are under the heel of the nations of the world. We're really not in a good place. Even the tzaddik, we're doing everything seemingly right, and yet the ship is going down. How do we understand it? So he explains that many things are so profound and so deep that even the prophets didn't understand this. Hashem did not reveal this to the prophets. But the times where the world needs an infusion of goodness, but they have to be worthy for that exceptional level of goodness. What is it? If the world functions in a context which seems to be there's no judge, there's no judgment, as if the world was cut loose and there's no accountability, and the Jews are suffering tremendously. We've been being denied things which, even at a minimal level, they're not providing for us. And the Jew is able to maintain his course. He doesn't stray. That is his level of faith. Despite every reason to abandon ship, to despair, and say, it doesn't make sense. And it truly doesn't make sense. God will put us in the position, although that may be a rational reaction, but if you truly have faith in God and you trust God, you'd say it can be. But rather, we don't understand. Rather than it doesn't make sense. I always mention when I originally started to teach in New York, I had pretty intelligent people attending the class. terrific educations, Ivy League schools, and they say, Rabbi, it doesn't make sense. I said, it makes sense. You don't understand. With time, you will understand. Only at the end of time, when God will reveal the value of all those very difficult moments, in retrospect, we'll understand the value of those moments. Because to be able to make the grade, despite every reason to fail, and we don't fail, that gives us special value. I'll give you an example. The Gemara has a phenomenal question, the Talmud. We find that a rooster pecks in a barnyard. There's a picture of a rooster pecking, head bobbing up and down, eating kernels of grain or whatever it is in the barnyard. So the Talmud quotes a verse that the way the rooster pecks in the barnyard, that's the way God pecks at us. Throughout history, the Jews were always pecked at. He always allows us to be the victims of the world's people take pot shots at us. Some is more serious than pot shots. He's always picking. Why? If we're the chosen people and we're God's children, why is he always pecking at us? And the word in Hebrew is pick. Like peck, pick, same idea. But it's a Hebrew word from prophets. Why? So the Talmud says it's an analogous to a king. A king extends a loan, very large loan, to one of his subjects. And he says, I'm coming to collect this loan in 100 years. So the borrower says, do I have to be concerned from month to month to pay it off? He says, no, you paid off the due date. The king had an intimate subject, a dedicated subject who the king loved, and he extends the same loan. And he says to the subject, every month I want you to pay off part of that loan. So in 100 years, when it comes to anniversary, the 100-year payment, you've paid it off. So the borrower says, the one who has that special relation with the king, he says, I have a special relation with me. And you want me to pay it every month. That means I have to be preoccupied coming up with means to pay that loan. I have the burden with this. The other person, he doesn't have nearly the relationship I have with you. And yet it said only in 100 years, just make sure it's paid off at the time of the due date. So the king says, you don't understand. If that person doesn't pay it at the 100th year anniversary, I will destroy him. And he's going to have such an untenable debt because he didn't pay attention to it. Therefore, it's not in his best interest not to pay it off sooner. But you, because I love you, we created a payment schedule. Every month you got to pay it off. As difficult as it is, but it's not as difficult as paying it off after 100 years. We can come up with that kind of money. You can't. So by paying it off every month, day in and day out, accumulating the means to pay it off, when the 100th anniversary comes, 100th year anniversary, there's a small amount to pay off. You pay it off easily. And therefore, you'll be the hero. You'll have that special relationship for all eternity. These other people, since they cannot meet that obligation, they go into the oblivion. They will be destroyed. That's the difference between Jews and non-Jews. Everybody has debt. We all have debt. Personal debt, communal debt, national debt. Has to be paid off. There's such a thing as ruin punishment. We're held accountable for our actions, positive and negative, deserving and accountable. There's liability. We have to pay the debt. How do we pay it? Always anti-Semitism, always discrimination. The Jew always gets the short end of the stick. On the average, even the United States of America, the land of the free, all men are created equal, whatever you want to say. There is, even when things were at the best, there was always an undercurrent of anti-Semitism. Certain parts of the country, always. Whether it's down south, always. And even where there wasn't, we're always careful not to ruffle the feathers of the Gentile, not to overstep our bounds. Even the person that didn't live as a Jew, outwardly, wasn't observant, wasn't committed. But being a Jew automatically paint you into a corner. That was a reality. Why? Because the Jew was always paying debt. That's the answer. But we pay debt at a lesser level, we pay debt at a greater level. But that we're always paying debt is now our best interest. Because as I said, when it comes to real time, in the year 6000, or Mashiach comes before the year 6000, and there's no longer to be choice, God will reveal to the world from the first moment of existence till that moment why things evolved and manifested themselves as they did. We needed infusions of special merit. Despite the pain, since the tzaddikim, the devoutly righteous, they had trust and faith in God. And it's only a test. God is testing our faith. That value gives us a major part of eternity. So therefore, God will allow evil to rear its head at certain moments in history, despite where we stand at that time. Of course, it's atonement, but the major part of it's not for the sake of atonement. It's to bring us to another level of worthiness, that despite that, the Jew still toes the line, and he still walks the walk and talks the talk. Could you imagine, in the concentration camps, the Nazis, Yamach Shmom, very often you have on top of the Aron Kodesh, the Ark, you have embroidered a piece of material with verses embroidered on it. It says, what's embroidered on? This is the gate through which tzaddikim walk. It's a verse in Psalms. So what did he do, the Nazis? Yamach Shmom. They put this piece of cloth, velvet cloth with the embroidered verse, and put it over the gas chamber. And when the Jews were streaming into the gas chamber, this was displayed. This is the gate through which tzaddikim go into. They enter into. Men, women, and children to be gassed. And within a short period of time, they die from this poisonous gas. And the Nazis are beside themselves. Hilarious. This is the ultimate joke. And the Jews, as they're going in, they're singing Ani Mamin. B'emunah Shleima. We believe with absolute faith. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Shem Echad. It's insanity. The world sees it as insanity, but how does Hashem see it? We're going to be put to death, and they knew they were going to be put to death. And the Germans, Yamach Shmam, are mocking them, and they're laughing to the bank, so to say, or to hell. And the Jews, they're declaring their belief in God, the unity of God, Shema Yisrael, and sing Ani Mamin. You know what the value of that is for the Jewish people? Another person would say, there's no judge, there's no judgment. We believe in nothing. But that's not the way these people went to their death. They didn't go to death like sheep being slaughtered. They had no choice but to be killed. But when they were going to be killed and murdered, it was with absolute faith. Their faith did not waver. Their trust in God did not waver. Their commitment to God did not waver. That's what we're talking about over here. But why? There are many reasons we don't understand. But even on, relatively speaking, on the superficial level, that infusion of that action or that statement or that belief, it puts us in such a level of good standing until eternity. The silence is from then going forward much prosecution, which Satan wants to prosecute us. It evokes a level of rachmim. I'll ask you a question. The Talmud tells us To be meritorious, you have to have merit. It's not simple. God brings merit to the meritorious. Person is not meritorious, God doesn't bring merit to that person. After World War II, England, the British, they oversaw Israel, Palestine. When the Jews wanted to enter into Palestine, what did they do? This is after going through a Holocaust. After 6 million Jews are murdered by the Nazis. These people, everything was taken from them. Their homes, their wealth, everything. They came with their shirts on their back. What did the British do? They didn't let them in. They put them in Cyprus into like semi-concentration camps, except they weren't death camps. The heat was at a level which was inhuman. That's where they suffered. They were denied basic amenities. This is the British. How could you be so cruel? After knowing what these people went through, and especially they were aware of the documentation, Churchill was aware. He didn't even want to know the numbers because he says, we can't be involved there. It's not relevant to us. So if the British know now that you have the ability to let them in, after they've been torn away from everything, and this is the remnant, why don't you let them in? The United States dealt with it differently. These Jews were admitted into the United States. This is, you bring merit to the meritorious. For whatever reason, the United States was meritorious, therefore they had the merit to allow the Jews to come here. And Torah was rebuilt here in America. The Jewish communities were recreated in America, in the United States. Nothing in Europe came to what happened here in the United States. This is Magal Tzchus Zakai. God brings merit to the meritorious. Now, after World War II, there was a view, in 48, there was a vote. Do you recognize Israel as a state or don't you? And there was a vote in the United States. Harry Truman was the president of the United States. He says, we recognize it. We recognize Israel as a state. You know what happened? Even the Russians acknowledged Israel to be a state. It's unheard of. How did they recognize? Because the Russians, they had their own reasons. They believed, many Jews were communists. This will be a foothold for them in the Middle East. Communism. They had their own, it doesn't make a difference. But nevertheless, we were voted in to be recognized by the world as a state. After we were recognized as a state, what happened was the Arab armies attacked. They went berserk. Here, these people, this handful of people, this narrow strip, they're going to be recognized as a state, as a country. They were going to destroy it with a vengeance. They tried. If you read a little bit of history, what happened in 48, that convoys of people going to outposts, which weren't such outposts, to survive it. God brings merit to the meritorious. Ones who were not meritorious, like England, they had an opportunity. God didn't give them that opportunity. The United States had the opportunity, and they took advantage of the opportunity. Roosevelt failed during World War II. He failed. Things came out about Roosevelt afterwards, which are unconscionable. He could have saved every week. Eichmann, Yamach Shmo Zichro, had 10,000 Jews being gassed and killed in Auschwitz every week. There was a delegation of rabbis that asked him to bomb the tracks that these cattle cars were transporting Jews to Auschwitz. It fell on deaf ears. Didn't want to hear about it. Let them all perish. That's Roosevelt. Roosevelt could have saved the day. 900,000 Hungarian Jews were killed in 1 year, were murdered in 1 year, 900,000. He could have made a major dent in that number. There were times they wanted to transport funds during the war, which was illegal, to deal with the enemy. Roosevelt wasn't happy about it. This is all documented. Why? These people are being victimized. They're being murdered. Men, women, and children. How do you not have a human heart? Where's your compassion? Didn't make a difference. They didn't have it. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was known, if people remember, after the State of Israel was founded, American Jews were very much into buying Israel bonds. They had all kinds of things in Madison Square Garden to sell Israel bonds. Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of Roosevelt, the president, she was in the forefront of promoting those bonds, that American Jews should buy it. And she attended every rally. She was atoning for her husband's misgivings. This is Eleanor Roosevelt. But despite what we went through, the Jews went to the death with belief, with faith. It did not shake their faith. The majority of the Hasidic community came to the United States. They came and said, we're going to rebuild. Despite what Hitler tried to bring about, we're going to do something which is the antithesis of what he represented. We will rebuild. We have large families. We will educate our children to be Jews. We're going to create strongholds of God's people, which they did. We'll elevate the standards in many areas, which they did. But that's exactly what it's supposed to bring about. That marriage, at the end of time, will stand for us. That will silence every level of prosecution. Why now? Why not then? This and that. As he says, only God knows. Right after the war, even the few Hasidic rabbis who came over, they had a paltry number of followers. Every one of those movements, these rabbis, Hasidic rabbis, today the communities, we're talking about minimally 100,000 people in the community. In the past 70 years, institutions, yeshivas, they've done things not to be believed, but it was the leadership of the rabbis who themselves were victims. They lost their families in the Holocaust, wives, children. They came, started all over again. So to call almost from scratch. But because they were great Torah leaders and their faith and trust in God did not waver, they said, we're going to go disprove what they tried to bring about. That's what happened. But that's Zakai. God brings merit to the meritorious. You could make a difference. So why did the other person make a difference? The means, he has the means. The leadership, he has it. So why didn't he? The answer is because he didn't merit. He didn't merit to have the merit. Merit is only brought to the meritorious. Give you an example. Many years ago, we used to have a fundraiser twice a year to support families for Sukkot and Pesach, to put food on the table. And all these families were dedicated to studying Torah. They were called Kollel people, Evrechim, young men studying Torah. And the money we raised was only available, they had to meet this kind of criteria. They had to be studying, or they were teachers, in the yeshiva, whatever it was. It wasn't for the working class, even though they may have been needy. But this one fund was specifically for people studying Torah. And we used to raise enormous amounts of money from a handful of people. Maybe 20 people, but of the 20, 3 people gave the majority of the money. Talking about millions and millions of dollars. I called up somebody, great philanthropist, the professed atheist, and I said to him, and I had a relationship with him then, an ongoing relationship. And I said to him, I said, I have an opportunity for you. These people don't have food on the table. We're not talking about supporting their Torah institutions. Not talking about that. These people, because of their financial situation, they didn't have the means to put food on the table for Yom Tov, for the holidays. And that's what this fund is all about. And I told him the people who were going to be there. And he knew all of them. So I said, do you want to participate? He says, it's a phenomenal thing. It's terrific. It's great. The punchline, it's not my cup of tea. That's it. What do you mean it's not your cup of tea? I value it. I esteem it. I respect these people. It's not my cup of tea. I do other things. This is God brings merit to the meritorious. If you have the merit, then you see its value. You don't have the merit, it could be beyond the Hope Diamond, beyond the primest real estate. I'm not in the real estate business. You're not in the merit business. If you're not in the merit business, you go into the demerit column. That's where you end up. So all that's transpired till today, where sometimes the Jewish plea falls on deaf ears, literally. And in a way, it may be a curse. But that curse, if you're able to hold out and it doesn't rattle your cage and you remain fervent in your belief, then you've made the grade. Then you're the real hero. You're not a fool, you're a hero. Because based on our tradition, what we received from Sinai, we have the ability to weather every storm. We may have casualties, but we still can weather every storm. I once mentioned an allegory from the Vilna Gaon. There's a certain type of gold, which when God created the world, there's a very limited amount that is gold. It's special quality gold. If gold costs $1,000 an ounce or $2,000 an ounce, this gold costs $1 million an ounce. It's called Zof Paz. That's what it's called. And there was this king, the wealthiest king in the world. He wanted to have his regal garment made of this special kind of gold. And he sent out his emissary, traveled the world for 2 years until he could accumulate enough of this gold to make the regal garment for the king. Comes back with this gold and he goes to his tailor, the king, to be fitted for this regal garment. And he asked the tailor, is this enough gold? He says, yes. Just the right amount of gold. We have to turn it into thread, weave it into cloth, and we're going to have something very special, the king's garment. And they do it. So the tailor says to the king, to be able to do this right, it's going to take me 3 years. But after 3 years, I'm going to produce something for you. You're going to faint from its beauty. It's not to be believed what it's going to look like. Okay? 3 years goes very quickly. And he fits the king with this garment made of this special gold. King looks in the mirror. He's breathtaking. He can't breathe. That's how auspicious, regal he looks. It's not to be believed. And he looks at the sleeves. He sees the pleats. He sees the curvatures, how it fits. And he says to the tailor, I want to explain you something. Thank you, but you're going to be put to death. He says, doesn't make sense. I mean, here you're praising my workmanship. And you say, no king looks like I look because I have this kind of garment made of this gold. And then you tell me you're putting me to death. He says, I'll explain you why. Because according to my assessment, the amount of gold that I gave you to make this garment, it's clear you stole some of that gold. And even a small amount of gold is worth a king's ransom. That's what it's worth. So therefore, you're guilty of embezzlement, and therefore you're going to be put to death. He pleads with the king, and he says to the king, I could prove my innocence. Every bit of that gold is in that garment. So where is it? He says, when I made the sleeves for you, they were pleated. When you pleat something, there's more material needed over there than elsewhere. So, but God forbid I didn't take even an iota of gold from you. I'm honest. So he says, could you prove it to me? He says, there's only one way to prove it. We have to open the garment, take it apart fiber by fiber, and then you'll see that every bit of gold you gave me is in this garment. And he proved it. But you have to unravel the garment. Then you understand each juncture in history, why it had to be the way it is. This one suffered, that one suffered. Pogrom, Holocaust, crusade, whatever it is. When he took apart the garment, he saw how every nuance, every curvature, every pleat needed an enormous amount of gold. But the tail there didn't take. Everything has purpose. Suffering, it doesn't make sense. The king didn't understand it. He had to unravel the garment to show the king that every bit of gold was in that garment. God will unravel history and show why at certain junctures the most special people had to die. Children had to die. We were displaced. At the end of time, that's all going to be proven in retrospect. Why that had to be the way it had to be.